Okay, so everybody who's supposed to be here is here, so I figure we may as well get started, and then maybe I'll just let you go a couple minutes early. So first thing I want to talk about briefly is the homework. It seems like there's still a lot of confusion about the homework assignments, and I kind of want to figure out where that's coming from. Because I thought last time I was pretty clear about when things were due, and what you were, like which assignments you were supposed to do, and what you were supposed to use as the basis for those assignments, right? So, I'm putting everything up on the board every class period, and it's also in the syllabus, which you have a paper copy of, and you have an electronic copy in the Georgia View site, right? The syllabus and assignments folders. So there are plenty of places where you should have access to this information. So I guess, I'm just curious, where are people getting confused?
I got confused because I thought for the first assignment, I thought we was just supposed to pick a paragraph up from the pages and just do the strings and bindings.
Yeah, that was what you were, but I think you picked the wrong text, right? You were working from the wrong text. So you had, so there's this long historical introduction in this book, right? And you had taken a paragraph from that rather than from the actual document that I wanted you to read, right? And I had given you the page numbers for that as well, right? So the page numbers for that are 128 to 132. The other thing is that several of you did that first assignment on the civil constitution of the clergy when the assignment was the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, right? That was the one you were supposed to be looking at.
That was page 36 and 37.
All right. Well, maybe you're getting that mixed up with something that's in writing analytically. Yeah, okay, right. So I think you got mixed up there. So the instructions for assignment 1 are on pages 36 and 37 in writing analytically, but the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, which I did also give you the page numbers for, is on page, it's on page 120 in this book, right? The other thing that some of you seem to be a little bit mixed up about, right? So each of the documents in this book has a little introduction in italics, right? That's not part of the text. That's an introduction that the editors wrote to give you context, right? So that's not part of what you're supposed to be analyzing, right? So everything that comes after that is what you're supposed to be analyzing, right? You should still read this part because it'll help explain to you what this text is and what's going on and what some of the key issues are. But what I want you analyzing is the text itself, okay?
Was it this book?
Yeah, those documents are in this book, right? The assignments themselves are in this book. So if I tell you something's in writing analytically, right, it's in this one. And if I tell you something's in the reacting book, it's in this one. Okay? Okay, so any other questions about that? Any more confusion about that? Okay, so does anybody have questions about the assignments that are due tomorrow and on Monday? So the stuff that's due tomorrow, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about free writing today, and we're going to do some practice with it. But essentially what you're going to do is a passage-based free write on the civil constitution of the clergy, right? And then you're going to take that free write that you did, and you're going to try to revise it into a short 500-word essay that talks about some of the important kind of unstated assumptions that we find in the civil constitution of the clergy, right? And again, we'll talk about what that means today, right? But that's what the exercise basically is. Now the stuff that's due on Monday, right, so I want you to read chapter 3 of Writing Analytically, and there are 3 try this exercises, right? The first 2 are about understanding and unpacking metaphors. And the third is going to ask you essentially to argue as to like what the decree abolishing the nobility implies without directly stating, right? So we'll do some stuff that will help us with those things today, right? But if nobody has any questions, and I'll wait a second to see if anyone does have questions, then we'll go back to where we were at the end of last class with the Jonathan Swift quote. Okay, and I do want to reiterate too, just like if you are at all confused about what you're supposed to be doing, if you're at all mixed up about what you're supposed to be doing, please just shoot me an email and I'm happy to try to help. Okay, one more thing that I do want to just kind of quickly go over before we go back to the Jonathan Swift. It seems like there was still a little bit of confusion about abstract or concrete words and what it means if a word is, like if an adjective is evaluative, right? So let me first say that the reasons I wanted you to do those 2 exercises were to get you to pay attention to specific words in what you're reading and to figure out what kind of work different types of words are doing in a text, right? So can somebody explain to me what the distinction is between an abstract and a concrete word? Let's just think back for a minute to day 1 when we talked about this, right? What does it mean if a word is abstract?
Words that represent an idea of the world as a whole.
Yeah, so an abstract is basically kind of like a concept word, right? An abstract word is something that's hard to imagine using your senses, right? It's like this is something that you can't really imagine how it looks or how it feels or tastes or smells. So, for example, if I give you a word like, say, freedom, right? Right? Freedom is a concept, right? We can't touch or taste or see it. Now, this doesn't mean that a word like freedom is useless, right? But it does mean, like with abstract words, the definitions are often going to be a little bit more kind of contestable and subjective, right? Because you're talking about something that people can't sense. So what is a concrete word then? So an abstract word refers to a concept that you can't access with your senses, right? What is a word that is concrete?
The specific term for the word?
Okay, yeah, concrete words do tend to be a little more specific, right? But if the key definition of an abstract word is that it's something you can't imagine with your senses, right? Then what must a concrete word be if that's the opposite?
Something you can see.
Yeah, something you can use your senses to imagine, right? So if I give you a word like flower, we can kind of imagine a flower, right? But if we're just talking about the general idea of a flower, it's harder to imagine what that specific flower looks or smells like, right? If I give you a word like daisy or daffodil on the other hand, right? Okay, that gives us specific sensory data, right? I know what this looks like, I know what this smells like. And different levels of writing like this tend to serve different purposes and to appear in different contexts, right? So if you're looking at, say, legal or government documents, you're going to find a ton of abstract terms, right? Because just about everything you're talking about is going to be conceptual. Meanwhile, if you're reading a novel or a poem, a good one anyway, right? It's often going to focus very heavily on the concrete in order to evoke particular feelings or particular ideas using your senses, right? Does this make sense to everybody? So, the reason I want you thinking about this is to kind of think about what kinds of contexts in which you're going to be encountering particular kinds of words and the kinds of uses that different types of words have, right? Remember, too, that this is a continuum, right? It's not like, you have to think of it as more like a scale than as being like an either or yes or no, right? A word is going to be more abstract or more concrete, not totally abstract or totally concrete. Does this make sense? Okay, any questions? Okay, so do y'all understand what I mean then when I refer to an evaluative word? This is actually kind of related a little bit to the abstract concrete thing. Okay, well, see if you can what's the root word of evaluative? What other word can you see in this? Evaluate. Okay, yeah. And what are we doing when we evaluate something? A little louder, please. I'm sorry, I still can't hear you.
Examining.
Okay, you are examining it, right? But you're examining it for what purpose? If you're evaluating something, what other word is in the middle of evaluate? Value, yes. So essentially what you are doing when you evaluate, right, is you're looking at something to try to determine its value. So evaluative words are those that indicate how you feel about something, right? Whether you like something or not, whether you value something or not, but typically don't give us any concrete, useful information about the thing itself, right? So let's take the daisy from our previous example here, right? If I say that the daisy is beautiful, what does that tell you about the daisy?
The physicality of the daisy, how it looks or appears.
Well, does it actually help you imagine how the daisy looks? Or does it just tell you how I feel about the daisy?
More about how you
Yeah, you can tell that it's something I like the daisy, right? That I think that the daisy is, it's a pretty flower, right? It doesn't actually help you get a sense of, how long its stem is, or what it smells like, or how many petals it has, or what color it is. It only tells you how appealing I find it, right? So, in general, we want to try to tone down the use of evaluative words in our writing because they typically don't help our reader understand anything except our feelings about the thing, right? So, if I say, for example, that a particular political policy is smart, right? Again, does that tell you anything about the policy or what it does? Yeah, it just tells you that I thought it was a good idea, right? So what you want to do when you find yourself using these kinds of evaluative words, you know, beautiful, smart, exciting, right? You want to try to break your own feelings down a little bit and think about the elements of the thing itself that you actually like or value, and present those things to your reader rather than, you know, telling them that it's beautiful or smart or exciting or whatever, right? So the writer Ernest Hemingway, who's problematic for a lot of reasons, but we'll kind of leave that aside, always advised beginning writers to, like, when they have a feeling, to trace that feeling back to a specific sense impression, right? To trace it back to the specific impression that caused that feeling. And instead of telling us about the feeling, describe that impression, right? And even for academic writing, that's really not bad advice. Okay, so any questions about any of this, about abstract or concrete words or about evaluative words and what we do with them? Okay, then let's go back to the Jonathan Swift quote from last time. I'm going to put it back up on the projector. Different projector because our usual classroom is in danger of flooding for some reason. Because they were supposed to fix the damn roof and didn't. Okay, so everybody take out the work you did last time on this and remind me what y'all thought this animal was. So Michaela, let's start with you in the back. What did you think the animal was?
I started out with a human, and I went to some sort of bird, and I went to a sloth,
Uh-huh.
and I went back to a human.
Okay, so why don't you read what you wrote so we can get a sense of what the process you followed was.
The writer started out with the hair and the texture of it. They also talked about the skin, of which was a brown rose color. They talked about the body parts such as the tail and where the hair was located. They also talked about why the hair may be located where it was, such as the anus and the face.
Okay.
And then they talked about the posture that they sit and lay on the ground. They kind of talked about their ability to climb trees and compare them to other animals such as squirrels. And they had strong extended claws, and the reason why they had these claws. And then I put, they brought attention to their actions, and they stated how they move around, and they talked about their size between the female and the male. And then they talked about colors.
Okay. So what evidence kind of led you to human?
The breast, where the hair was located.
Okay.
And I think I stopped there.
Okay, so that was when the exercise ended. That was as far as you got with it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, if we look at where the hair is located, right? Okay, on the head and the face for males, and there's just like a little bit of down on the body, right? And then a couple of other spots, the anus and pubis. So basically, there's some hair in the ass and on the crotch, right? Okay. So if we're talking about hair placement, okay, does that sound like a human? Yeah, that's more or less where human beings have hair, right? Okay. Ariel, what about you? What did you come up with?
Okay, so I went to a bat, then to a human, then to a monkey, then to a horse, then back to a bat.
Okay. So explain.
Okay, so I did more like a scientific breakdown of it. So like I went through like the physicalities of it.
Uh-huh.
So I said, first I went through like the physicality of the animal. And I said it's covered with multicolored fur and
Mhm.
skin with skin, brown, red, black, and yellow.
Okay.
Then they said they have extended claws, which
Mhm.
could be like, you know how bats use, okay.
Sure.
And then I said, they're with a buff breast, covered with thick hair, and I thought of a bat.
Mm-hmm.
Then I said like a beard that resembles a goat, and then I thought of a goatee on a human, so that's where I went to human.
Okay.
And then when it said, oh yeah, and then I said this animal is not a bird due to this. I said it's not in the bird. I thought it was a bird first, but
Okay.
then I was like birds don't have claws. And
What
then it said
what else don't birds have?
They also don't have hair.
Yes. Okay, good. Right. However, so if this creature was a bat, what would it have?
Fangs,
Okay, yeah, probably fangs, right? But what else?
wings.
Wings, right? Yeah, what are we not told this creature has? And do bats jump or climb? They fly, right? What about you, Shaquilla?
The main animal I thought it was a monkey,
Okay.
but it was just like clues that didn't really add up to it. It's like it says it didn't have a tail,
Okay, doesn't have a tail, right?
and
So a monkey has a tail, right? But does an ape have a tail? Apes do not have tails, right? Okay. So it could have a tail and still be an ape, right? What was what did you write? What's your process here? What did you?
it was like a bunch of gibberish.
Well, that's free writing. You know, you're just getting thoughts on paper.
So I think he's a monkey, but there's some clues that didn't add up. Cause his been having hair on his buttocks.
Mm-hmm.
And they also said about climbing trees, so it kind of led me to think it was a monkey also.
Yeah.
And about the climbing.
So if we're thinking of an ape here, right? Are there things here that suggest that it's not an ape? Well, actually, a lot of apes do have claws, right? Either for digging or for climbing. Yeah, the coloring is a little bit too varied for any single species of ape, right? You know, if you're looking at, like, for example, you know, chimpanzees, right? Chimps' fur is pretty much all the same color. And they typically don't have beards, right? What about you, Colby? What did you think?
First I thought it was a human,
Okay.
then I thought it was a baboon, and then went back to the human.
Okay.
I believe that these animals are human with beards like goats and lack of a tail,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the females barely having hair. The creature sounds like ancient or primitive humans. The usage of the last sentence where the author states that he dislikes the creature serves as a twist. And I went on about twists. I also believe the creature could be a baboon because when I read about the lack of hair on the buttocks, I could only think of the red of the baboon's butt. The climbing to the trees also supports the baboon theory as they are monkeys, though as I think about it, ancient humans and humans today can also climb trees.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot think of any other arguments to support my theory that the animal is an ancient human, regular human, or baboon, though. I have more evidence for humans, so I'll choose humans. I thought of another argument for humans. I can only think of 3 animals that have a wide variety of hair colors: cows, cats, dogs, and humans. I added cows after I wrote 3.
Okay, so that's good that you're comparing different possibilities here, right? It's like, well, if I'm looking, okay, so I see, it has these characteristics that these animals share, right? But this group of animals doesn't have these characteristics that this thing has, right? So yeah, comparing and contrasting things that are similar is often a kind of good way to get to the bottom of something, right? That's a good thinking strategy. And it seems like you're all doing that to an extent, right? Although that seems to have been kind of the center of what you were doing, Colby. It's like, okay, I've got these possibilities. This is why it's probably this and not this, right? So those of you who said that the creature is a human are correct. This creature is, in the novel in which it appears, called a Yahoo. And Yahoos live on an island that is ruled by hyper-intelligent horses called Houyhnhnms. And the horses, kind of barely tolerate the existence of the Yahoos and use them to do menial tasks, right? So this is in a novel by Jonathan Swift called Gulliver's Travels. And the joke here is in that last sentence, right? Which I think at least one of you noticed, right? Upon the whole, I never beheld in all my travels so disagreeable an animal, or one against which I naturally conceived so strong an antipathy, right? So Gulliver, our observer, right, how does he feel about these creatures? Yeah, they're disgusting, right? Foul, horrible, nasty, filthy animals. So what conclusion have we managed to reach before Gulliver did? What does he not understand about these creatures? Yeah, he doesn't get that what he's looking at is another human being, right? And if we look at the words that he uses to describe these creatures, right? Words like claws, right? Okay, strong extended claws. What would we call those on a human being? Yeah, they're just uncut fingernails, right? Do we typically use a word like dugs to describe human breasts? No, we use that to describe an animal, right? The same thing with a word like, pudenda, we use that to describe like an animal's groin, right? So he's using this language that we typically associate with animals. And a lot of these kind of like long kind of sciencey kinds of words too, right? So he's talking like a zoologist. Right? Like what a human being would look like to, say, an alien creature who studies animals, right? So there's a kind of distancing between the narrator and the object he's observing, right? But the joke's on him, because the thing that he's observing that he finds so disgusting is just like him, right? So it shows a lack of self-awareness on the author's part. So we can use this work we've done to determine what the animal is to provide an interpretation of the passage, right? Just through careful observation and picking apart, like not just what specific words mean, but also the tone of specific words, right? And the number of abstract sciencey words. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what we've just done, and what we can use free writing to do, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do when we read or write about anything is uncover assumptions. So what is an assumption? What does it mean to assume? If I make an assumption, what am I doing?
Coming to an conclusion about something based on what you kind of believe.
Okay, it does have to do with things that I believe, right? What's the difference between an assumption and a belief that I come to through, say like careful study or conversation or argument?
An assumption is kind of more based on manufacturers, kind of like an opinion.
Okay, yeah, it's closer to an opinion, right? So closer, kind of like one of these kinds of unexamined things, right? So an assumption is kind of a concept that I think is so basic, right? Or that I, so firmly think is true that I don't think I need to explain it, right? So it's something that I take for granted. Right, that I don't need to explain. And we're all told not to do this, right? And you may have, there's the phrase that your parents or teachers might have used of, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, right? But pretty much everybody does this because in our day-to-day writing and in our day-to-day conversations, right, we simply can't explain everything that we assume to be true, right? So we use this kind of like little bit of intellectual shorthand, right? Now, sometimes it's sloppy, and sometimes it leads us into trouble and into unexamined opinions. But whenever you are reading or watching anything, it's a good idea to think about the ideas that are just kind of baked into this, that whoever created this thinks are so basic, they don't have to explain it, right? So it does take some work to unpack. So let's start maybe by thinking about movies. Do any of you like or watch horror movies? Okay, that's a couple of nods. Not everybody's a fan. Okay, so when you go to see a horror movie, what do you expect you're going to see? Okay, you're right. Yeah, one of your assumptions going in, right, is that it's supposed to be scary, right? And there will be say like ghost monsters or some kind of serial killer, right? Who may be a ghost or a monster. Are there other expectations that we have of horror movies? Is there a typical kind of horror movie plot? Okay, what does a horror movie plot usually look like? For one thing, who are our usual heroes or perspective characters? Okay, weak people. Okay, are they weak in particular ways, though? How old are they typically?
Teenagers.
Okay, yeah, particularly your average slasher film, right? If we're thinking about that horror subgenre. Yeah, we often have teenage protagonists. And what weaknesses do these protagonists usually display? What's that? Just stupidity? Okay, yeah. So let's run in this cave where we can be cornered, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So there is often a lot of bad decision making, right? But is there often a kind of a logic to who survives and who dies? Who tends to get killed?
Black
The
man,
hero.
blonde woman.
Okay, often, right?
The heroic one, like the ones who try to be heroes, I guess.
Okay, the ones who try to be a hero sometimes do get killed, right? And some of this might be a result of generational shifts, but at least the horror movies that I grew up watching, it was usually connected to behavior, right? That the teens who had sex, who drank, who used drugs, who talked back to their parents, who shoplifted, whatever, right? Who engaged in risky or immoral behaviors were the ones who typically got killed. And the teenagers who behaved virtuously usually survived. So this may be kind of less the case. That this was certainly the case regarding the horror movies that I grew up watching in the 80s and 90s. So there's an assumed morality here, right? That horror films assume a conservative moral universe, right? Where teenagers who follow the rules get to survive and become adults. And those that do not are killed in their dreams by a guy with a mashed up face and claws on his fingers, right? So what we've done here is we've pulled out an assumption, right? An unstated belief that we've drawn out by examining a pattern in a bunch of films of a similar type, right? And you can do this with just about any text that you're looking at, right? So what you want to do is when you're looking at patterns in anything that you're reading or anything you're watching, try to figure out, right, what must the person who created this assume to be true? And there's often going to be more than one answer to this, right? But even if we think back to the Jonathan Swift example that we just looked at, right? What must Swift have believed about human beings to write that passage in the way that he did? Would it help if I put it back up on the screen?
Can you repeat your question?
Okay, so what must Swift have believed about human beings to have written that passage the way he did, right? What's the assumed belief about human beings in that quote?
That they're kind of like savages in a way.
Okay. I think that's part of it, right? That's one assumption, right? That human beings really are vicious, nasty, brutish creatures, right? No different from other animals. What's the added elements to this assumption that we get from that last sentence? On the whole, I never beheld so disagreeable an animal. Right. Think about Gulliver's lack of understanding of what he's looking at, right? What's the assumption underlying that?
So, okay. So in the passage,
Uh-huh.
he was basically describing the humans as savages. So you're asking
Yeah.
what he would believe that we as humans should actually be like?
Or what did he think?
Not what he thinks we should be like, but what he thinks we are like.
Oh.
Things were
Not like animals.
Yeah, that we're all like animals, right? But then why doesn't Gulliver recognize what he's looking at? Okay, I think you're thinking along the right lines here, right? So he's not used to seeing people running around, naked climbing trees, right? He's used to seeing people, bowing politely and eating with a fork and knife and wearing pants. So then, what is all this bowing and being polite and knife and fork using and pants wearing behavior covering up?
The realisticness, I guess, of like how other people might be,
Yeah, well, about how other people might be?
or about how he might be, other people might be, not from his certain part of where he's from.
Biologically speaking, though, is Gulliver any different from them?
No.
No, he's human too, right? So the other assumption here, the two-part assumption is that one, human beings are no different from other animals. The second assumption is that we pretend to be different from other animals and thus don't recognize our own animality, right? We pretend we're better, but we're just fooling ourselves. So those are the assumptions underlying that, right? So if we had to say that there was like a major binary in that quote, right? What are the two ideas, the two biggest ideas that Swift is opposing to one another here? What are the two sides of that binary? What kind of creature is Gulliver? He's a human, right? And what does he think the Yahoos are? Yeah, so we could say that the controlling binary here is human versus animal, right? But the trick Swift plays on us is that he collapses that binary, right? Human is animal. And that's how that's basically how the passage does its work. So when you're identifying these strands and binaries, right? Think about the kind of work they're doing in the bigger context and whether the author actually wants to try to reinforce or break down that binary, right? So let's try a little bit of practice with this. I'm going to give you one of the early founding documents of the United States of America. So this is the Mayflower Compact. So this is what the Plymouth colonists wrote collectively as a kind of a guiding charter for the colony they were setting up, right? As the basis for the laws that they were going to make for themselves and so on and so forth. So I want you to take a little while to read this, and I want you to do a little bit of free writing about it. Let me just kind of give you a couple of directions when it comes to free writing, right? So the first thing you do when you free write, right, you have to set a time limit for yourself. Usually something between 10 and 20 minutes works. If you don't set yourself a time limit, you can just kind of keep spinning your wheels and going in circles, right? You can always start a new one when you finish, right? If you feel like you didn't get anywhere. But in like that time pressure is going to push you to dig deep for ideas. And it's also going to prevent you from thinking in circles. Right? You're going to want to choose a short quote or passage not that you think you already understand really well, but that you want to understand better. Right? This works best if you're trying to pick apart something that you're not sure you completely understand yet. You want to try to figure out the passage's point of view on whatever it's about, right? So remember what we talked about last time with naturalizing your assumptions, right? Assuming that everyone in the world thinks like you do and that's just common sense. Don't do that, right? Instead, think about what the quote or the passage seems to believe to be true, right? Think about what they seem to want you to think about this subject. You want to try to identify an important strand or binary and explore what it means. And then finally, when you're wrapping up, you want to try to connect the strand or binary you've identified to some bigger idea in the whole text. So I want you to do some free writing about this document. I'm going to give you first 5 minutes to read it and to ask any questions that you have about it, about the language, right? If there's a word or a concept you don't understand, right, feel free to ask me about it. Then I'm going to give you 10 minutes to write about it. Try to follow these steps. And then we'll read what you wrote and talk about it, okay? All right, so your 5 minutes to read starts now. Do I have any coffee left? Oh, good. It is also generally a good idea, especially when you're looking at something difficult, to do repeat readings and to make notes while you're reading. Right? Take note of take note of interesting or confusing words. Yeah, I see you're kind of drawing connections between words you think are I think that's a good idea. Okay, and now you got 10 minutes to write. And remember that part of the key here is to keep writing, right? Muscle activity stimulates the brain. It might sound like bullshit, but it's true. Yes.
When you're asking for the free writing, for like figure out the patch's point of view, are you asking what the author is writing from, or what the point of view is for about the article?
The point of view that you think the author is writing from.
Okay.
Like what values and beliefs you think they're expressing.
Okay.
Two more minutes. Okay, that's it. Time's up. So, just a couple of quick points I want to make about free writing. One, don't revise, right? Don't go back and revise. Only go forward. Remember that the goal here is not to produce something polished or even coherent, right? You're just trying to think your way through a problem on paper. So you don't have to go back and fix anything. The other thing is that, you might find yourself writing 500, 700 words in a 10-minute free write and only have one usable idea that comes out of it, right? That's fine, right? That's totally okay. The point of free writing is to help you generate ideas, right? Not to, give me something to evaluate. You're not necessarily doing a free write for the benefit of a reader. It's something that you do to help yourself reason through something. Okay, so that said, how did this go for you? Like, how difficult did you find this to do? Middling?
It's like, if you already have background knowledge about history, I guess it could be a little bit more easier.
Okay.
If you don't,
Yeah, and and again, I think for what we're doing, background knowledge isn't necessarily something that you do need for this. You can actually, one of the reasons we do the free write is to just try to pay attention to the language, right? But yeah, I mean, I can see where somebody who has a little bit more historical knowledge and is more accustomed to, say, reading 17th century legal documents would have an easier time formulating ideas with this, right? Anything else you guys found hard about this? Yeah, go ahead, Ariel.
the vocabulary in it.
Okay, just the vocabulary in the piece. Okay, and I meant kind of generally, like, what did you have trouble, like, what did you find difficult in free writing? Like, in the process? I expected you guys would find the vocabulary of this a little difficult.
I think what was difficult for me was trying to put what I was thinking into words.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and this is actually one of the things that free writing is good for, right? If you're just spitting out things on the page, right, eventually you find the right words that for what you're trying to express, right? And you're doing that without any pressure, that, the instructor isn't going to like this or that a reader's not going to understand it, right? Because, again, like, you're doing it to get your own ideas on paper and to see what you think. And it's something you can always go back and clean up when you're actually trying to work it into a paper. Anything else you guys found hard about this?
Trying not to write the same thing over and over.
And and honestly, if you find yourself in a little bit of a rut or a loop, that's okay, right? The thing to do is just to, even if you're just feel like you're writing the same thing over and over again, keep writing it, and eventually it's going to kick something in your brain, and something new is going to come out, right? Mulling over, we all watch, or do we all watch detective shows? Yeah, how many times do they have to go over the same ground, right, to be able to construct a convincing narrative about what happened here? So it's totally okay to keep going over the same ground to try to generate some kind of new idea, right? So yeah, I think like a lot of the things that you're having difficulty, these are things that are totally okay in free writing. Now, was there anything that you guys found particularly enjoyable or helpful about doing this?
Maybe understand myself and how I interpret articles like this and put it on paper.
Okay. So you feel like it actually did help you to an interpretation of this? Okay. That's good. Anything else? Anything else positive you guys feel like you got out of this? Because we're going to be doing a lot of it. Yeah, go ahead, Michaela. What were you going to say?
I think I like how I was able to nitpick at my own brain and pull out
Uh-huh.
different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically having a conversation with yourself on paper, right? And one more, I'm going to give you all one more piece of completely unsolicited thinking and homework advice. But when you are working through a particularly difficult assignment, whether it's a reading assignment or like a set of chemistry problems or a paper or whatever, right? Start working on it right before you go to bed. Our brain does weird shit when we're asleep. And if you're thinking about something difficult when you go to sleep, when you wake up, you may very well have a lot of new insights into that particular problem, right? But yeah, so we are close to out of time here. So I think we'll read these over and talk about them next time, right? So we have a chance to give everybody a fair shot here. But yeah, just remember when you're doing the free write for tomorrow, right? Don't revise, just give me what you type on the sheet during the time limit, and then you're going to revise that into what you turn in for assignment 3, right? You're going to try to take those ideas and make them coherent. Okay. Have a good weekend, everybody. We'll see you on Tuesday.